Welcome back to the Iron Sights podcast. I'm here with John Chappy Chapman. He was introduced to me by a very good mutual friend of ours. His name's Chris Sizlove. Shout out to Chris Sizlove. But without further ado, John, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, my friend.
I'm excited to talk to you today. This has been a long time coming. Like I said, we got connected previously. We've had some conversation or some logistics issues in terms of me getting together with you. It's all on me in terms of making this happen. But man, you fit right into the kind of a common theme, particularly this year on the Iron Sights podcast, as we talk about law enforcement training. There's culture and leadership that's gone into that, something that you have a good deal of experience with. And then there's a foundation that we're going to talk about, and we'll introduce that. But maybe what we just start with is you giving folks a little bit of a background on you, who you are, where you come from, and what you want them to know about you.
Sure. I'm John Chapman. Everybody's called me Chappy since I was a little kid. Been in the law enforcement game since about 1991, starting out and training myself and then getting into the career. I worked in California as a law enforcement officer for quite a while, and then got into the training side in about 1996. Started learning how to teach in about 1996. Started really standing on my own, kind of teaching, starting with the skills stuff, with the fundamentals. Probably the best place to learn how to teach stuff. In about 1998, kind of standing on my own. Started a little training company in 2001 called LMS Defense, and started that. And when the GWAT kicked off, it got to be there got to be a crazy need for teaching. So I transitioned. I've spent the rest of my career going back and forth between being a full-time guy and a part-time guy. Always trying to maintain my credentials and stay current on what's actually going on the street. That's why I didn't just flat out quit and go teach full-time forever. Spent most of the GWAT teaching and going doing contracts, coming home, teaching some more, go do some contracts, come home, teach some more. Then I ended up as a BCM gunfighter by invite in the late 2000s, or probably 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. And have been a BCM guy ever since. I was a BCM guy long before that. I've known Paul for a long, long time, but and providing training where it's needed. As with most training companies, it's go where the students are and try to feed yourself. And about 8 years ago now, I decided I was getting to be a little long in the tooth to be living on the road. The guys who are watching, who've spent a lot of time on the road, know that that's a grinding life. It's like being a rodeo rider in a lot of ways.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, you're teaching enough to make your gas to get to the next place to teach, and which is awesome. You're doing a lot of good. That's one of the things I loved about teaching on the road, was getting to interact with people of the tribe and get to know new folks, and got a lot of opportunities to spend a lot of time with close friends around the country. Excuse me. Determined I was getting a little old and fat to be doing that, so went back to work full time, which I had done a couple times during the GWAT, but I went really dedicated back here in Middle Tennessee to being a full-time cop again. Okay. Been a SWAT lieutenant and detective for about 7-8 years now. Ran the patrol division for a while, just kind of getting back in the groove of commanding guys on the street in a small department, or a medium-sized department. I thought it was small at the time. I kind of started big and moved down in department sizes. I'm sure we'll get into that to talk about why the foundation exists at all. And I thought this was a small department, and it turns out it's actually not. It's more of a medium-sized department when I actually got into what the reality is.
Like the demographics or whatnot,
Right.
like the statistics actually are. Yep.
Exactly. So I've always tried to not just instruct, but teach. And in order to do that, you have to determine what guys actually need and focus on that. It's what led me to kind of standing up the night vision training programs on the civilian and domestic law enforcement side, because it didn't exist. And the
Mm.
team I was on at the time, we needed it. So that kind of snowballed into writing a bunch of white papers and defining a bunch of things that a lot of people knew existed, but nobody had put it all in one place so it could be turned into a doctrine. And CQB kind of came about as a passion for me for the same reason. There was lots of
Info.
yeah, lots of info. Back in the day, there wasn't a ton of info. There were some paper books. I know there's a lot of people watching who are younger, but we used to have these things called books. So they were printed on cardboard and paper, and you had to read and look at the pictures and take notes. And that was a thing back in the day. Your and I's age, we kind of remember that, but that was the only real source material available. And in domestic law enforcement side, which has always been my primary focus. I was in the Navy, but I was a submariner. I wasn't a Navy SEAL Delta Ninja Alert type guy. Like
Mm.
I that wasn't my deal. My deal is domestic law enforcement. So focusing on what we needed, and there wasn't really a codified doctrine that could be used as a foundation to start from. Like the goal in any doctrine development, especially in domestic law enforcement, there's 7,000 agencies in the United States. You can't have one doctrine. It just doesn't work that way. Like they're
Mhm.
designed to be independent departments for a reason. Like we'd have the French style federal police if we didn't have our constitution. So trying to encourage that individualism, but at the same time giving them a starting point for how to develop a doctrine, give them kind of a boilerplate to start from, and then they can do whatever whiz bang stuff they see on Instagram that they want to try out. Like they have a baseline to push from, and that just didn't exist. So, um,
Let me time you out for a second because I have a question
mhm.
just going back because what you're talking about is putting together curriculum, right? And
Yes,
how do you start? Where do you start? You mentioned, I think it was
mhm.
either 96 or 98. You said
Mhm.
something about I was entering into instructing, but I
Mhm.
think like in 96, but in 98, you started to learn how to teach. Can you
Yes,
talk about that a little bit and differentiate between the two?
sure. So in the bureaucratic law enforcement world, law enforcement is a bureaucracy. It's an Article 2 function, but it is a bureaucracy. So uh, it's run primarily by the 50 states, and each state has a different set of standards for what it means to be a instructor.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 1970s, that problem began, and it really became a serious issue in the 1980s, where it became in order to advance professionally, you had to be an instructor. So it became a check the box program for a lot of folks. In law enforcement, there are a lot of guys who want to teach, but for political or personal or staffing, or there's 100 different reasons, they they only get to go to an instructor development class, and then maybe they'll pick a specialty and they'll get instructor certified to teach something. And that's how I started at first. I went to an instructor development course in California. Then I went to a couple of firearms instructor courses. And back then they were 80 hours. There were a couple weeks, and it was phenomenal instruction, like the instructor development and the officer safety and field tactics instructor courses. And I haven't taught or taken a class in California in a couple decades at this point, but at the time they were phenomenal. Like
So,
they were.
so you've said that twice now. You said it was
Hmm.
phenomenal, and so I'm
Hmm.
curious, like knowing what you know now and seeing an
Hmm.
evolution, was it was it equal to, better than, or is it just evolved differently since then? Because to say that, you don't typically hear that, man. You hear like,
Right.
hey, I had some decent training, but that's where I learned what I didn't or what I needed to go out and learn more about.
Right.
You're saying it was really good. Can you just expand on
Hmm.
that a little bit?
Sure. I think there's a demographic and societal reason that type of law enforcement bureaucratic driven training used to be better than it is now. And I think the reason for that is every generation. So the guys who were teaching me had been teaching since the 70s.
Mhm.
So they were the people who developed the curriculum that they were teaching, which is
Mhm.
the critical component.
Mhm.
Um, independent ability to conceptualize a doctrine and turn it into a curriculum is what's required to teach effectively.
I could not
Um,
agree with you more. There has to be buy-in, accountability, and a deep
correct.
level understanding of
Hmm.
every component within there. Yeah, and if you don't
Yep.
have those 3, if anything's missing in there, you have a lot of work to do to get it to a place to where it's quote unquote phenomenal for sure.
Right. Exactly. And the reason that training was so good is that it hadn't been diluted generationally yet.
Gotcha.
Um, so I noticed as I started teaching when I first, or I started instructing. So there's a fundamental difference between instructing and teaching. So it has gotten worse and worse and worse as we go by because the bureaucracy of the law enforcement culture becomes more and more um, solidified. It becomes much more about whose rice bowl you're
Mhm.
impeding than it does about are we teaching cops who have a constitutional mission? Are we teaching them what they actually need to know? I discovered as I instructed that I was regurgitating.
Okay.
And that is not teaching. Instruction is reading off the PowerPoint or reading off something that somebody else wrote. And that's what I kind of discovered. And I really lucked out generationally falling in with those guys who were like on their just about to retire. Like these guys were older.
Okay.
We had a couple of CHP guys who used to be just brass ball gunfighters. And I don't know how they are now, but back in the day, those dudes could fight.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, and the same with sheriff's departments around the state and some of the police departments. Phenomenal guys, lots of experience and lots of time able to be dedicated to independent thinking about the doctrine that they wanted to develop, so that they could then create a curriculum based off of that.
Mhm.
Curriculum isn't the goal. Curriculum is a product of a
It's a
good
result,
doctrine.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So the more I instructed, the more I realized I didn't know.
Mhm.
Like I was just regurgitating.
Mhm.
So that's when I started to really pay attention to, well, first of all, get myself actually educated on how to create a doctrine, and doctrine is way, um, it has been villainized as a term.
Absolutely. I agree with you
Um,
100%.
But it's not meant in this is the only way to do it. A correct doctrine is a doctrine that is encompassing of the mission that it is desirable to create an ability to accomplish, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
So trying to identify the capabilities that we were not training to, and then use that as my, not a research project, but my goal, to identify those things that a lot of people aren't teaching or they're not teaching well, and then learning how to be a teacher. Teaching is an individual task. It's an individual leadership skill. It is not instruction. Instruction can be taught to 40 people at the same time on a PowerPoint. Teaching is one on one. Doesn't matter how many people you have in class, you have to be able to teach that guy, identify where in your doctrine he falls and what he's lacking, or into your curriculum that you've developed based on your doctrine, and then what that guy needs. That's what's important. Like the fact that he doesn't have the same experience that I do, or um, looking at it as this guy's from a small town, he's in a small agency, I'm just going to tell him what I do, and I'll probably get some dopamine hits on the way, making him think, what a giant penis I have.
Right, right,
You know
right.
what I mean? So I had to learn and all learning has to be conscious. So I'm consciously focused during that period of my career on how to actually teach. And I had some phenomenal mentors. Probably the best one was Pat. Pat Rogers was probably
Mm,
the best mentor
legend.
for teaching me how to do that.
Hmm.
But again, Pat was teaching me.
Hmm.
And Pat was teaching dozens of other guys at the same time. Like, phenomenal mentor. He would identify the guys that he saw it in. This is what he never talked about it, but I think this is what he did is he identified the guys who would best be able to fulfill that leadership task of teaching and start like right seating them all the time and pushed me to develop things. And it wasn't just Pat, but Pat was the primary mover in that. For instance, the CQB stuff. Hey, not for nothing, but why don't you like develop a doctrine for that?
Hmm.
Like, all we're doing is battle drill 6. Why don't you come up with something that's, coherent? So that's what led to that type of
Gotcha.
developing that type of methodology to actually be able to teach.
So I have some questions in here. You first off, you just covered a lot of things at a high level that we could
Hmm.
dig deep into rabbit holes on. And I think you did a
Hmm.
really good job of explaining and differentiating, which was my question.
Hmm.
The other thing that I wonder about now, just with how things have evolved and where we are now, 30
Hmm.
years later, right? Um, is or more for that matter. Sorry. Going back to divulging ages here, but 30 years later, and at the time, the skills, right, that
Hmm.
officers really need in order to be able to do their job, right, and do
Hmm.
it well,
Hmm.
uh, and how things have evolved from a well at probably at one point, I'm guessing here, tell me if I'm wrong, but what we had was, you're going to work every day. Maybe you had a radio, right?
Hmm.
Probably. Maybe it was actually hardwired into the unit, to the
Oh,
vehicle,
we had
right?
handhelds back then.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
you had
that old.
handhelds. All right. So you have
Yeah.
that, right? You've got a firearm, right?
Hmm.
Which you obviously need to be skilled and competent in terms of using. There's
Hmm.
also decision making that goes on with that. And you likely had some type of you know, uh, a nightstick is in air quotes, I would say, right? Right. Whatever
Hmm.
that was issued to you or what was you
Hmm.
were trained on. And that's pretty much it. Am I wrong?
Well, we had some less lethal tools, but not a lot of them.
Okay, so that's where I was going with this. Like, is
Hmm.
all the other things that are now being brought into or have a doctrine about, right? That then has to
Hmm.
have a curriculum built in that then starts to get piled onto all the things that we think or say, and I'm not saying they're bad things, that
Hmm.
an officer has to have to take to the street. And there's always time constraints, there's always funding constraints, and there's always staffing issues, and all those things in terms of fulfilling all those things. And I wonder how that evolved or how that has impacted the quality of instruction when it comes to some of the very basic things in terms of tools. When we start adding things like,
Hmm.
all right, well, now we have no new use of force policies. So it's not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's just
Hmm.
now that changes how we have to teach this curriculum, right?
Hmm.
Um, we have tasers. We didn't have those before. So now there's that part. And so we've added another thing to the layers of use of force or escalation of
Hmm.
force or whatnot. I wonder how that stuff has impacted or how you've seen that be um, I don't know, maybe beneficial or detrimental to this process of making sure we are putting the right people in the right places, teaching the right things to the right
Hmm.
people in a way that is actually productive.
Right. That's a pretty insightful question. So that's driven by a couple of things. Bureaucracy always wants or always seeks the level, and by level, I don't mean making everybody the same. I mean, it seeks the point where the people become immaterial. The individual, in our case, officer or deputy, becomes immaterial. We're never going to, or they are never going to get all the way there, but the further down that road they can move, the better in their mind, because it makes it easier to manage.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's harder to lead, it's easier to manage.
Hmm.
So people have to be led individually. There is a lot of good that has come by the technological development started by Sid at LA County, and pushed by guys like Sid and Clay Anderson and a few other folks to really push the less lethal tools availability. that has been seized upon by some aspects of the bureaucracy to turn this into an equipment question.
Mm-hmm.
We can fix a problem with equipment.
Mm-hmm.
The equipment is ancillary. It's partially necessary. Where that creates issues is there are only so many hours to teach. In the best place I've ever worked, the best training wise department I ever worked under Jim Laughlin, phenomenal chief. We trained 8 hours a week. The patrol did.
Wow.
That was,
people just heard that and went, what?
yeah.
What?
And it worked. Now it required him going for more budget. We had to hire, I think, 2 more people for every patrol team. But his reasoning was, reduce liability. He was very good at that type of leadership and management, expressing those concepts, right? So even that is not normal. For the public watching, who are interested in police stuff, we're lucky to get 40 hours a year. Lucky. Most states, that's the mandate for continuing education. That has to include all of the high liability things, the firearms, less lethal tools, defensive tactics, child sex abuse, domestic violence intervention, driving, and emergency driving, right? Those are the big ones that you got to cover that in 40 hours and your time is done, right? So the equipment of less lethal tools, especially, but there's a bunch of other equipment that's coming in to try to reduce the amount of long-term training necessary. So, trying to make equipment, because equipment individually does not have to be. Continuing education is less important in individual pieces of equipment. That allows the bureaucracy to not look at the actual problem, which is the constitutional use of force. And then, your state laws, the things that take longer to teach, they're conceptual. So you have to teach the thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. You have to teach. It's less needed when we're talking about individual pieces of equipment. And the bureaucracy has also encouraged and kind of solidified the concept of you're already certified in that less lethal shotgun. So what else do you need? That was 4 years ago. What do you went through the instructor school for this, 6 years ago. Why do you need to go to another instructor school? You're already checked off on that. The bureaucracy gets super excited about stuff like that.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine part of this too is like, so let's take it back to the taser as an example. Just I would imagine nearly every department across the United States is carrying those now, or close to it. You could probably correct me on that, but if I'm wrong, please do. But my point of this being, there's a money grab here. Like, if everybody's going to be using these, then we, as a business that provides that type of equipment, want to be first to the bidding process. We want to get that in there, and we're even going to provide the equipment, and we're going to provide some free training, around that. And what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to pay us, a yearly or annual, fee in order to have this equipment. So we keep making money. Basically hand over fist, because you're going to have to repair it, you're going to have to replace it, you're going to have to, all of those kind of things in terms of a maintenance fee. And so that funding for that is a little bit easier probably to come by, because the department or the agencies or the institution doesn't have to foot the entire bill. And so if I'm on the bureaucracy side of this and I'm looking at it like, okay, so all the things you just said there, all I got to do is get my officer certified on this. After that, I don't have to worry about it, right? It's kind of taken care of. All I have to do is make sure I'm meeting my liability requirements for this company, that I did the training, that we provided it, and you're providing it because I'm paying you to provide it. So as long as you keep bringing that in here, I'm good. Namaste. Have a good day. Like, the liability piece is off of me, basically. And so is the budgetary problem that is going to come around this stuff. But again, now I without you saying this, to me, this is what it sounded like in terms of the connecting the dots. Now you have a tool to solve the problem. And as long as you have this tool to solve the problem, we're good. When the reality of it is, what we've just added is another layer of complexity to the larger issues that officers and the public is faced with on the street every day. And we haven't addressed anything. We haven't addressed the problem at all, which goes back to the training and the teaching on how to actually do the job of law enforcement.
You are in the 9 ring. So, excuse me. Always, as an investigator, as a detective, I'm always looking for the grift. So when I'm investigating a case, some companies want to sell to a department once because they've identified something that a grant fund, well, the vast majority of equipment purchased by law enforcement, other than firearms and cars, is only funded through grants. So the department executive doesn't, the whatever executive authority above him, whatever governmental body funds him, has been taught over the years that, well, our budgets either go down or that money is applied to staffing, never training and never equipment. So there are legit equipment needs that
100%.
the equipment can enhance the officer's ability to more constitutionally exercise his duty. That always comes with the HP printer problem. So that is exactly as some energetic weapons companies do, where we'll give you this thing for damn near free, right? We'll get you addicted to the public perception of you being able to end things without having to fill people full of bullet holes. So when we first get this equipment, the equipment is free, the cartridges are expensive, right? So then that creates a good public relations view because we can have our local media broadcast us using that tool to not have to fill somebody in. Hey, our officers didn't have to shoot somebody. Your tax dollars invested in this less lethal program, and it's awesome, right?
Winning. Yeah.
Yeah. So 9 or 10 years down the road, as it is now, oh, that thing we were giving you for free, we have discontinued it and you can no longer buy the cartridges for it. This new whiz bag thing, which is even better, fires 2 different darts. You can shoot them at longer distances. Isn't this awesome? They're only
sounds good. Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, they're only $11,000 a piece. And the cartridges are free now. But we've addicted you to this tool that your biggest problem, your biggest ass ache is going to be when you discontinue using that tool because you can't afford it. Your public is going to be pissed off the first time you use a baton or you use something that looks bad. So that's the pernicious danger of over reliance on equipment because it's easier to teach. The teaching is usually, if it's not free, it's fairly free. If it's not free, it's also an HP ink cartridge because you have to do this every year. You have to keep an instructor certified. You have to do whatever. There are exceptions to this. Excuse me. For instance, the less lethal tools that involve chemical agents. They created a very good, reasonable, and wise training requirement system back in the 80s when they first came in. Back when my mentors' generation were running things, that is one of the few of those equipment type programs that actually still function as they're supposed to because you can kill people with that stuff. Now you got to try, but you got to really be working at it, but you could, do it somehow. So catch stuff on fire, things like that. So, but in the main, equipment is used as a reason to categorize the officers or the deputies differently. They're not an individual, they're a number. So he's got X, Y, and Z boxes checked on his form in the academy, and then he checked these boxes in his FTO program. And then once a year, we do all these little check boxes, and I don't want to hear from that dude again. Like,
Right.
he is trained.
We're good.
Now, the fact that as soon as any opponent pushes back on him, um, he has a far higher likelihood of falling apart and making a bad decision because we haven't put him in that circumstance. Because training is not a bureaucratic priority.
So that you just highlighted all the things that I was hoping you were going to highlight there, and I don't think anybody listening to this inside law enforcement or outside, as a public or civilian, can see how problematic that becomes. And I think a good way to relate to this is, like, nowadays everything's on a subscription service, right? We've got you addicted to, oh, you want to watch your local baseball team? Okay, cool.
Right.
Well, that's not on network TV anymore, but you want to watch that game, so we're going to make you pay for it, by subscribing to the Premier Holy Shit package on our broadband, Comcast, whatever thing. And it's going to come along with a lot of other things you probably don't care about or won't ever use. But in order for you to feel good and watch your team, this is what it's going to be. It's other things going on with, like, automobiles. Like, everything is being siloed into, if you're buying a new automobile, it has to be serviced. It has to be repaired by the dealership. They're not outsourcing the software to get into the ECM or anything like that to offsite mechanics. So you are now completely reliant on this quote unquote service that you're getting. And when that happens, a lot of things get to happen, and that is the quality of the service you get, the quality of the tool, or in this case, the product that you're getting, certainly seems to be declining. And it's kind of like, this is what you get. Like, you don't really have a choice. And again, so that appears to be very problematic. And the other part I just want to reiterate here from my perspective is how much that then convolutes the training process for getting somebody up to speed with the actual skills and the actual hard skills, as well as any soft skills that come along with that, getting that done to a proficiency level that makes sense to actually fulfill the thing that they thought they were getting, which was, we may have to use less lethal force, or we now have this option to use less lethal force to end a particular threat. And so, again, this is a question that I've had, so this is my question for you, is like, what are we actually valuing in our officers in terms of the skills that they need to have in order to actually constitutionally do their job? And for me, it breaks down very simply. I'm a dumb dude, right? I just see what I see, and I take what I gather, and I try to feed it back. And that is, look, there's some very particular things. You have to be very proficient with the firearm. You have to be proficient at fighting. You have to have a certain level of fitness in order to do this. And then driving is another one of those things. Those are things that come into play just about every day for an officer, or at least once a week on their shifts, every single day. Yet we pile on all this other stuff, right, that gets in the way of the box ticking, gets in the way of making sure that stuff is actually in place. So my question for you is just coming back, and we're going to start to get into kind of where the foundation is coming from here, because I want to introduce that. But what are those skills, man, for you? Like, what are the pillars that we need to be focusing on, and we need people to understand this is what needs to be focused on inside and outside the institution of law enforcement?
Well, the good news is there's only about 206 of those skills. So there's and I'll answer your question, I promise. But there's a reason we are in such a jam with modern day law enforcement and culture. It's a challenge of demographics. It's a challenge of the economy. It's a challenge of modern society, with the generational issues that were created by the generation before you and I, that are still having unforeseen consequences down the line. So one of those consequences is, I was very unusual early on in my career. I changed departments. That was weird. Like,
Unheard of.
what's wrong with you? Like, and my family was moving, and, we were going to college in a different city, and, like, having to move, kind of understanding, but it was pretty unusual. Today, the average duration of an officer who works in a mid-size or small agency is about 4 years. So
Really?
it's gone from 35 years was the average in all sized departments. Now we're lucky in our region and in almost every department in what's determined to be a small agency, and we'll explain when we get
Yeah,
into the foundation
let's get
stuff
into
what
those
that actually
stratifications.
means.
Yep, yep.
But those numbers are even lower. So we're seeing departments, or we have departments in our region where I live now, and have for 8-10 years. They're seeing 80% turnovers annually.
Hmm.
Like the reason that's important is it takes about 4 years to make a good police officer or
Mhm.
deputy sheriff.
I would have said
Like,
5. I would have said
yeah,
5. Okay,
it's
4.
about 4 years, right?
Okay.
So in the old days, back when I was a youngster, you did a 6-month academy and a 6-month FTO period.
Mhm,
So after a year, you were considered a journeyman. And
mhm,
then you needed 3 or 4 years of seasoning, and then you could really be trusted to be left on your own and make good decisions and not panic and those kinds of things. The challenge in the modern society and the modern demographic is a lot of states never went to a 6-month academy, so they have them for 12 weeks generally, is kind of the average around the country. A 12-week academy, and then you get what FTO you have time to give them, and then they're on their own.
mhm,
So part of that has become a bureaucratic tone in some agencies. Obviously, not every agency is the same, and a lot of agencies aren't this way. But a lot of them, that's a seat filler. That deputy or that officer is there for now, and I know he's leaving. I know he's going to go be a lineman or go to welding school, or
mm,
he's going to jump to a different department for 23 cents an hour, whatever it is. So I'm not going to invest in that kid.
mm,
And that's a problem that it's not fixable on our side, and we'll talk about it. But like, I really believe at my core in spending the intellectual effort to figure out what is most important that I can actually touch. What can I actually do? I can sit around and bitch about
mhm,
politics and how messed up the department is or whatever. What within those problems, what's the most serious issue that I can actually touch?
mhm,
So, um, anyhow, so I think that cultural and bureaucratic problem that is outside of our control is really driving the soup, or is part of the soup that is causing the drop in performance ability kind of across the board. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Large agencies of over 100 officers have never been better in their training. Big agencies train better today than I've ever seen before, kind of across the board. Like, they have the resourcing, they have the people, they've identified it as a serious issue, et cetera. They're not the challenge. The challenge is somewhat the middle-sized departments, but especially the small departments.
So let's identify that just from a numbers
Hmm.
perspective, give some metrics
Sure.
for that. So you said large departments is 100 plus, right? And
Hmm.
for me, like I live in a large metropolitan area. I think our
Hmm.
local agency has somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1,600 sworn officers, right? So
Hmm.
that's much bigger than 100. You go down
Right.
to, other big cities like Los Angeles or whatever, they have thousands, right?
Hmm.
Across, multiple divisions. But
Right.
when we're looking, but when we look across the map of the United States and how this thing
Hmm.
actually plays out, outside of large cities like that, what is the
Hmm.
mid size and what is the small size, and what's the
Hmm.
percentage of makeup of those agencies nationwide?
Sure. So the mid-size agency is usually between about 25 and 100.
Okay.
Those make up right at 12 to 15% of agencies.
Okay.
Uh, from 12 to 15 officers and less, so those are small agencies. Those make up 70% of the agencies in the United States. So 70% of the law enforcement agencies in the United States have less than 10,000 residents. So that's the bulk of the law enforcement officers in the United States. The challenge is they're so separated by
Hmm.
being in different agencies that they're kind of they're managed by the state somewhat with their training, and they don't have a lot of time or resourcing because they're small. In a lot of ways, that's a gift from the Constitution, like trying to drive down governmental separations as deeply as possible was one of the purposes of not only the Constitution but the Federalist Papers and how they kind of defined what we mean by the Constitution. The Federalist
Okay.
Papers weren't just a political document; they were an actual buyer's guide
Hmm.
for what the Constitution actually means, written by the guys who wrote it at the same time. So they
Hmm.
were writing the Federalist Papers as they codified the Constitution. Federalist 17 really lays out what we mean by um, ensure domestic tranquility, which is drive the law enforcement authority to the state, and then the state bifurcate it in as small a chunks as possible.
Okay.
So that's why 70% of the law enforcement agencies in the United States have less than 10,000 residents. It's because constitutionally, that's how it's designed to work.
Hmm.
The challenge that we face is that, like, that is working still. It hasn't been federalized explicitly. It's been federalized in other ways, but explicitly it has not been. The challenge is that brings with it the bureaucratic oversight from the state and the federal government, which really restricts. It's how the police have been federalized is through funding and regulation.
Hmm.
So,
Follow the
uh,
money.
yeah, follow the money. And you want funding? Well, then you need to do things our
Got to play
way.
ball. Yep.
Right. Or you don't want to go to prison for rights of civil rights? Do things our way, follow
Mm.
our case laws. So, um, that's the real challenge. The problem is those guys are just ignored. 70% of the officers in the country are just ignored. Like,
Yeah, if I need what'd you say, an $11,000 taser, like, and I'm going to
right.
get that funding for 10 officers from 10,000 people, I
It's
think
not going to happen.
that's not going to happen, right?
Well, and their tax money in most states, the local agencies, the sheriff's offices and the police departments are funded by property tax and in some ways sales tax, but both of those pots of money go to the state and then they're redistributed back down.
Yeah,
So it's a smaller version of how the federal income tax and excise taxes work.
yeah, a lot of pockets to line on the way back down that funnel.
Yes. So if you pay, so I answered a question a couple days ago on the foundation, and I know we haven't even talked about it yet. We're way into it, but
We're getting
that's
there.
cool. Yeah, I know. No, it's totally cool. This is a great conversation. Um, the question was, well, I already pay my taxes. They're supposed to be teaching the cops. Here's
Mhm.
the problem. It's not the government's mission to train cops. It's the government's mission to ensure domestic tranquility. It's on us to teach the cops, so the departments to
Mhm.
budget and figure out how that works. The problem is every tax dollar you pay goes to the federal government first. So you pay $1 in federal income tax. First of all, there's a problem that less than 40% of Americans pay a tax at all.
Mm.
So that's a pretty pernicious problem, and that's getting worse. Even though the president's trying to fix it, and some people in Congress are trying to fix it, that's still a huge challenge, right? That dollar goes to Washington D.C. Let's say that it somehow matriculates its way back down to your department.
Well, they take
It has
20%. They take 20% of that, right?
They take 60% of
Okay, so
that.
now you're left with 40 cents.
Yes. So
Mhm.
40 cents goes to the state. So that 60%, by the way, is administrative. It is
Don't
payroll for the federal government.
You're just
It
gonna piss me
is,
off here, John.
I
You're
know.
just gonna
Well,
upset me
I
here.
know.
Yeah, I
I
just
know.
want you to know.
On average, every dollar paid in tax, 40% of that makes it back to the states.
Mhm.
So that 40% is then matriculated down to your police department. You know, your 4,000 resident Dirty Ashtray, Mississippi Police Department, right? So that wasn't meant to offend
Oh,
Mississippi,
now you're pissing other people off, John. I hear you.
but I make a
I hear you.
sport of naming towns. But so of that 40%, maybe 10% of that's going to get back to your city. So, and the smaller your town, the less likely you are to get a return on investment of your tax dollar. So that is why things like the foundation, and there's other things, there are some states that are trying hard to do it, and some different associations that try hard to do it. When we get to it, we'll talk about why the foundation covers what it does and things like that. But there is lots of room for foundation type work in law enforcement training because there's 206 skills that everybody's got to know, so that skill, that's just the first step. Teaching the individual officer is only the first step. They then have to be integrated into a technique. Like, we've taught you this skill, this is how it works with two people doing it. Like, this is why it's important, this is how it's done. And then those techniques, after they learn them, have to be built into what's our actual procedure? How do we as a department deal with these problems generally? Because that's the only way to actually create a capability. The capability is theoretical until it's made a reality by a codified set of procedures that
Which
this is how we're.
goes back to the beginning of our conversation. And
Exactly.
yeah, and this is where we are. So let's talk about the foundation. This is a good place
Mhm.
to tie it in, because now that we've sort
Sure.
of identified large, medium, and small agencies, the percentage
Mhm.
of which that exist within the United States. Let's talk
Mhm.
about that 70% and the
Right.
mission of Task Force 70 and the things that you're doing there, because I think this is an interesting. You're the first person I've ever heard talk about attacking that problem. And
Mhm.
obviously, here's the thing. This is why I wanted to spend so much time at the beginning of this getting into the foundation, is because of your deep level of understanding of how things operate. This isn't a pissing
Mhm.
and moaning contest, and I've just chosen
Right.
this group because it's 70%. There seems like a real opportunity there.
Mhm.
Correct. There is an opportunity there, and it's the largest opportunity for a lot of reasons. And you
Mhm.
just identified every single one of those reasons. And you've got 70% of the cops out there that want and need to be trained, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody has the same level of motivation or drive to
Right.
get that done. But at the same time, that opportunity, the fact that that opportunity is already at a severe disadvantage on so many
Mhm.
levels makes this a really important topic to talk about. And this is what I really wanted to get into. So you've kind of set the foundation for how you understand bureaucracy to work, the
Mhm.
Constitution to work, tax dollars, the funding, and also obviously when we get into the training piece, which is where the foundation is really focused, is
Mhm.
how that needs to be done correctly, right? And how that needs
Right.
to be done appropriately. So have
Right.
at it, man. Get into it.
So, knowing all of that information in the background, along with also understanding the how severely local small agency crime is changing, there's a excuse me, there's a serious sociological challenge that exists right now that didn't before. The Zoomer generation, uh, your and I generation, we're both Gen Xers.
Mhm.
Um, the first house we bought was probably right around 30 years old. We could afford to buy a house at about 30. The
Yep.
current generation coming up, the average is 40 years old. They can't afford to buy a house. And these are the kids that we want to be cops, right?
Right.
So we have a whole soup of sociological problems that are also discouraging them from following that, right?
Mhm.
It's also making crime, it's it's matriculating crime into smaller and smaller jurisdictions through the combination of addiction and the lack of the sanctity of the right to property.
Right.
Um,
Let's call it
like you,
psychiatric crisis, for God's sakes.
right, because
Impacted by all of those things.
right. So all of those things impact small jurisdiction law enforcement at a greater percentage than big departments. Big cities have always been a shit show at the lower level, like at the lower level of society, or
Sure.
the less rich part of society, right? That's never really been a problem in small jurisdictions because they kind of police themselves. The citizenry does. Well, the interconnected tissue of the citizenry in small towns has almost completely eroded because of all of these larger societal issues that we have no control over. So,
Okay.
knowing all the problems we talked about, or all the challenges that we talked about with taxes and demographic issues and societal issues, my core principle is, what is the thing that runs the deepest that I am capable of touching? What can I touch? Like, I can stand around and bitch about, Congress or whatever. I can't touch that. I have no effect on that. What I can do, given my skills, is I know really well how to teach people how to shoot, how to teach people tactics, how to teach people how to breach doors, and how to teach them what the Constitution actually says. So, law enforcement as a culture has focused for about 45 years now on the preeminence of case law over constitutional law. Case law is malleable, it can be changed. The Constitution cannot. So that's a whole nother 2-hour conversation about
Yep.
that we won't get into right now. But understanding that, there are 5 things that are super important. There's more than 5. There's 206 total, and
206.
there's about 10 that are super important, not only for the cops, but more importantly for the victims of crimes, the residents of underserved jurisdictions. These things are very important for them because every unjustified use of force, every unnecessary use of force, every um, overexertion of governmental authority, like walking down the middle of the street shooting people on their own front porch with pepperball guns because the freaking governor told you to.
Yep.
Like, stuff like that degrades the trust of a small community in their law enforcement officers, and they begin to be seen as an occupying force.
Mhm.
And that's already happening in the big cities. How do we reduce the likelihood of that? Make it easier for those departments to actually serve their communities, right? I figure that with my skill set, what I'm good at, and what is needed, I've identified 5 of those skills. So the foundation exists to teach those guys those 5 skills, right? In 2 different formats that we'll get to. The other large problem that we've identified is there is no centralized repository or ability to get a think tank type operation for small jurisdiction law enforcement. There's hundreds of white papers and PhD theses on criminal justice. There is no one place that a department can contact and say, I've had this long term problem of XYZ. I need to know how to constitutionally, wisely, and within my community's expectations, how to solve that problem. So there is no, and that requires an institute or a think tank. So that's kind of the second mission set for the foundation.
Okay.
And the third one is a mobile training team that is not intended to drive around the country, because there's tons of great training available to guys who are willing to pay for it. That's not a
Mhm.
problem, right? This is the golden age of getting trained how to shoot. Like, there's lots of great people teaching that. And that's not
Tons.
and
Yeah.
and they're phenomenal. Like, we need
Mhm.
them. That's why I don't teach that anymore. That problem is being solved. So
But one of those problems in
the
this particular case is going to be, you mentioned this earlier, driving
Mhm,
around, right? Making barely enough money to get you your gas in your hotel on the
mhm,
other end to basically do a service for somebody, like
mhm,
going into a small town, or let's go into a region with a couple of small
mhm.
agencies. If they can't put butts in those seats, they're not going there, man. They
Right.
can't afford to do that. They can
Mm-hmm.
give it away a couple of times and maybe feel good about it, but they have to put food on their table. And so if they
Mm-hmm.
can't go pack a class, and when I say pack a class, 16 to 20 students
Mm-hmm.
or whatever their nut is they
Right.
got to make to cover their expenses,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going there. So as many of them as there are out there that are doing a great job, and there's as many officers that would gladly pay if they could afford it, right? If it's,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I've got the time off, I can go and I drive an hour to go do it. But if I've got to
Mm-hmm.
get on an airplane to travel to a big city where this is being
Mm-hmm.
offered, or a much larger region where this is being offered, that starts to put these things, or starts to make these things inaccessible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're going with this. When you go back to the mobile unit, is how do we make it accessible to them? How do we go to them and provide that
Right.
service for them?
That is correct. And how to provide it not only to them individually, but to their agency. So the problem is, I don't know what the number is because the Department of Justice is intentionally terrible at gathering statistics. Like
Mhm.
they only gather and massage the statistics that they need. But let's say best case scenario, best case, excuse me, 10% of cops want to be able to shoot better.
Okay.
At the most, that's what exists.
Okay.
In a small agency, a guy making 17, 18 bucks an hour, even if that guy is a gun guy and wants to go take it, he can't afford to do it, right? So it's kind of the problem
Cost
you expressed.
costs money to shoot, even if
Right.
you got to have ammo to do that, right?
Exactly. And I guarantee you that dude has some sort of dry fire
Yep.
regimen, right?
Gotcha.
He's not the one who needs the foundation. The foundation is the dude who carries a gun because he has to.
Hmm.
The problem is, yes, he carries a gun because he has to. Doesn't matter when the school teacher calls in that there's somebody with a gun in the school, or there's a violent domestic and a guy's on his front yard waving a gun around. You know, the public expects freaking Delta Force to show up.
Yep.
They
Every
don't
time.
care that you don't train. They don't care that, like, they have a reasonable expectation of the public, or the I'm sorry, the public domain being peaceful. Like that is a constitutional right laid out in the preamble of the Constitution, is ensure domestic tranquility. The officer not having the desire to get good with the weapon systems or the techniques or the skills that he needs to have, I don't care. Like that he doesn't want to do it. Like that's not my problem. My problem as a chief of police or a sheriff or a chief deputy or a training lieutenant is that that guy can do it. That's my problem.
Hmm.
So the MTT exists to do a couple of things, provide that training, but based on something. Like this department, we're already, as a foundation, the facility isn't built yet to do the primary mission to bring people in to teach the two primary classes, but we are able to do MTTs already. So we already have donors supporting the mobile training teams, and we're already doing them. We did one week before last. So we we communicate with the executive and leadership level of that department and figure out what they actually need. Like I can go teach a red dot pistol class or
Right.
a CQB class all day long. If that's not what that department needs the most, they all need that stuff. But what do you need the most?
Hmm.
Like, what is your weakness? And a lot of departments don't know. So the point of the Think Tank Institute and the MTT working together is identify what is actually needed in these small agencies who frankly don't have a pot to piss in,
Right.
but their citizens in their jurisdiction still have the right to expect it. They have the right to expect competent law enforcement. Like we're not asking to turn these guys into ninjas. Like we're just trying to get them to a competent level that not only they can get there, but they can mentor other people to do it. The days of instructor credentialing are going away because of the high rate of turnover within the profession. So those are kind of the three core missions of the foundation: is to provide the facility and the two different courses, week long each, that are meant to kind of build into one another. I should probably have
Yeah,
explained those first, but
let's talk about what the 2 courses are in terms of that needs
so
analysis. And,
sure.
and I think when people hear this, obviously I have some insight to this, but when
Hmm.
people hear this, they'll get it. Like
Hmm.
and obviously within these 2 things, there's a lot of deeper level things.
Hmm.
But when I think as a citizen about what I need or I want when my mother has to call 911 or I have to call 911 or my daughter or whoever else has to call 911,
Hmm.
I think this will make sense to them. So, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead and go through those.
sure. So we have some underlying facts or realities that have to be addressed, right? When we go somewhere and teach a cop in his home station, we're getting about 60% of his attention. So because of kids' dentist appointments, he
Mhm.
knows everybody in the class. We
They're
get
just
about
humans, man.
60%.
They're just
Yeah, they're
humans, man.
human.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah.
bad. They're not bad guys. They're not bad cops, but we're training them where they can sleep in their own bed.
Mhm,
It's not nearly as effective. We get about 90% of their attention when we bring them to one place with a bunch of dudes they don't know. We also create a networking effect across the country when we're able to do that. So
mhm,
we're building a facility here in Middle Tennessee. A large donor has already donated the land. We're already moving dirt. We're working on donations from the public, from you
mhm,
guys, to build the
mhm,
facility. But so that piece is moving. Through a couple of years of some pretty deep analysis, right? We've determined two things that aren't being covered or aren't being covered effectively. One of them's not being covered effectively, and the other one's not being covered at all.
mhm,
The first is called the Patrol Tactical Operations course. So, right now, the only um, stand in for that is the active shooter training that's going across the country. And that's great, but that's for one circumstance. Like
mhm,
teaching small town cops who get 50 rounds of firearms training a year and no tactics training the vast majority of the time, them maintaining a complex CQB procedure that applies to schools doesn't help them deal with the guy in the front yard holding a gun, right? So the Patrol Tactical Operations course focuses on what we think are the big five: the constitutional judgment, making good judgment based on the Constitution, excuse me, marksmanship. And again, we're not just teaching it to them, we're teaching them how to mentor other people. Breaching is the number one need that has the least amount of training at the patrol level. Patrol
okay,
gets almost no breacher training. Medical training, the Stop the Bleed program, and several other Dark Angel and several other places are doing God's work, spreading that information. But there can always be more, and
mhm.
it needs to be fully incorporated into everything that we do.
Right, can't
And
can't
then,
can't be a standalone. Yep.
right, it has to be integrated into a capability. And then finally, tactics, teaching them tactics in a way that they can, number one, retain in a week, and number two, teach it to somebody else. And it's applicable to any problem that's within about 50 yards. Like the tactics are the result of the application of a procedure to a circumstance. So, like, that's what we're trying to teach them is the basic procedures for that.
Is
Then
it fair to say on that particular topic that what you're giving them is like a baseline SOP that could
yes.
then be expanded based on their particular circumstance and or environment based on
Hmm.
this multifactorial, problem that exists. How many
Hmm.
officers do I get? Where am I? And is this
Hmm.
mostly trailers in a rural area that I'm going into,
Right.
where things look different than if I'm in a small city that actually has like some apartment buildings or
Hmm.
multi-unit complexes and things like
Hmm.
that. So it's not like here's how to solve each one of those problems. Here's a baseline SOP
Hmm.
for how you may go through the problem solving process, right? And
Yes.
then you can adopt or adapt what's
Hmm.
needed based on
Hmm.
your particular circumstance.
Yep. Not to
Okay.
get too deep into the weeds on it, but if a person can identify an angle of exposure, identify the combination of that angle of exposure with other angles of exposure, and then have a heuristic way that, because there's only four ways that occurs, there's only four combinations of angles of exposure on Earth. So if we have, and I'm not going to get any deeper
Yeah, yeah,
into it
yeah.
because that'll take us on another 10
Oh yeah.
hour side
Diatribe.
stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But teaching them those allows them to see them in everything. and then they have a foundational tactic or procedure that they can apply and then adjust on the fly as they go
Mhm.
and end up where they need to be. So that's the patrol tactical operations courses, those big five.
Gotcha.
The second course, they have to take that before they can take the second course, because we're kind of starting where we left off with patrol tactical operations, and that is patrol hostage rescue course. So hostage circumstances are not what they used to be. So over 80% of all circumstances that can be identified as a hostage situation are solved within 90 seconds of a patrolman discovering them. Over 80% of those are resolved in the first minute and a half, either through negotiation, through intervention, through a less lethal means, however it is, turned into a barricade. Like, especially in large agencies, we're doing a great job over the last probably 25 years of teaching actual hostage rescue teams in local departments. Like, bigger departments have the funding to do that properly, and those guys are getting good at it. Like,
Mhm.
they are. So that's not the problem. The problem is from the time the officer arrives until that team shows up, which could be anywhere from an hour to
Mhm.
6 hours, depending on where their jurisdiction is. Somebody's got to manage that thing. Like, you can't just sit there and stare at it.
Right.
You have a priority of life that you're responsible for saving that victim. So teaching them a fundamental way to identify what it is for what it is, determining what the best course of action is based on the stimulus that the suspect is giving you, and then how to make some good decisions and some fundamental ways to intervene when it's necessary. There's a lot of times it's not necessary. Most hostage situations revolve around domestics, which are emotional events. People are not psychologically damaged enough to have a true intent to harm, but we still have to treat it that way.
Yep.
The vast majority of those hostage circumstances are resolved peacefully. Somebody still goes to jail, but it's resolved peacefully. The guys don't know what to look for to identify it rapidly enough to prevent it from going sideways. So that is a key critical constitutional responsibility that we have as law enforcement officers that is just not being taught at all.
Mhm.
It is just not being taught because it's somewhat a resourcing issue and it's partially a gatekeeping issue. Like, I'm a SWAT guy. You're not allowed to do hostage jobs. You call us, let the adults take care of it. Well, that's bullshit. Like, the first guy on the scene needs to be able to take care of that thing if it's possible. At a minimum, what that will allow him to do is to isolate it and contain it enough and get it stable enough for the professional hostage rescue guys to show up and do it.
Mhm.
Right. But we still got that period of time that has to be managed somehow.
So we've got these two courses, right? And you did a really
Mm-hmm.
good job of articulating kind of how those break down and then the order,
Mm-hmm.
which makes perfect sense. Now, the rationale there makes good sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think about the training that does happen out there, and so these are both week-long courses, 5 days.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a big piece of this because when we go back to the box ticking with the
Mm-hmm.
bureaucracy, and you mentioned like the active shooter or school shooting situation where
Mm-hmm.
there's a program out there that's put out by the federal government and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I don't want to get into that. I've gotten into that with other guests, and I've actually
Right.
seen some of that curriculum, and I've seen other curriculum, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen other courses being taught. And again, they're all being faced with the same challenges: budget,
Mm-hmm.
numbers,
Right.
time, all of that stuff. But when we get into the box ticking scenario again, well, how can we do this in the fastest, most efficient way that costs us the least amount of money to get
Mm-hmm.
this done? What invariably happens when we look at not just, okay, what training got done? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to dig deep, that people think about digging deep into like, well, what actually happened there? They went to training. Really? Well, what
Mm-hmm.
was that training? Because if there
Right.
were if there were 40 people there on that training day and two instructors, three, five instructors for that matter, right? And I
Nobody
had
got
six.
taught.
Nobody got taught anything, man. They got
No.
they got shown some things. They had an
Mm-hmm.
experience, right?
Right.
And how many reps did they get? And what did
Mm-hmm.
those reps look like? And
Right.
who were they training with? Were they training with
Right.
officers from other agencies? What
Right.
are their SOPs, right? And
Right.
how do they take that back to what tools, what resources
Mm-hmm.
do they have to take that back to the department? And I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
missing gap in terms of I'll just say this. I think law enforcement has done a terrible job of educating their public, the citizens that
Mm-hmm.
end up funding this stuff or not funding this stuff, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's through city councils, federal, local, all those kind of things, to understand what it
Mm-hmm.
is that their officers are actually getting, but more specifically what they're not
Mm-hmm.
getting.
Right.
And so not only does we talked about the difference
Mm-hmm.
between teaching and instructing, doctrine, curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
putting it together. And then I think the thing that you highlighted the most is like, how do we teach somebody to take this back and teach it to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
to a degree that needs to be simplified. And
Mm-hmm.
it can't be clouded or muddied with, I learned it from this guy, and
Mm-hmm.
this is what we did in
Right.
Afghanistan, or this is what I do in
Mm-hmm.
Dallas when I live in
Mm-hmm.
Ashtray Town,
Right.
Mississippi, or whatever. Because
Right.
we are not the same, man. We're
Mm-hmm.
not the same. We don't, for
Right.
tons of reasons that are innumerable, for that matter, right? So
Right.
I
Yep.
I think about this, and then obviously being able to bring people in. You mentioned something interesting there about having a captive
Mm-hmm.
audience, and
Right.
what the retention level rates are like
Mm-hmm.
when you're in certain environments. And I've been to those in many different situations. We call it
Mm-hmm.
firearms training, combatives training, but also just in business and the things that
Right.
I've done in my own career. And you couldn't be more right about that. Where can
Mm-hmm.
I go to actually be completely enveloped by this
Mm-hmm.
and see all these different takes, see the reps that other people are taking,
Mm-hmm.
and get the reps that I need. And
Right.
and at the end of the day, like, we go hard. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
start at 8 and we
Right.
go till 5. You're exhausted. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, you get some dinner, maybe be a little bit social, but you better be in bed and be
Yep.
back, because the next day we're going that way again. And how much more gets downloaded on the motherboard
A
in the
whole
building
bunch more.
process? Tons more, tons
Yeah.
more, tons more. Yeah.
Yep.
Obviously that would be
Awesome.
the ideal situation for all the trainings
Mm-hmm.
for all these guys. But to your point, like, they get 40 hours a year.
Mm-hmm.
40 hours a year, which is, I think that
And
would be
that's got to
mind
cover
blowing.
everything.
Yeah, all the things, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
everything from less lethal
Yeah.
to firearms training to DEI
Mm-hmm.
policy, right? Like,
Right.
it's all in there. And I think our citizens would be shocked to understand that. And I think, like, if
Mm-hmm.
your town of 10,000 understood
Mm-hmm.
that about their law enforcement, they would be
They'd be
on
upset.
board. Yeah, they'd be upset, and they'd be on board with, like, well, that doesn't seem right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's no
Right.
wonder we're having these issues. Like, whose
Right.
fault is this? Who should I really be pointing the finger at, kind of thing? That's,
Right.
sorry to get on my soapbox, but
That's okay.
I mean, there's a very clear
Mm-hmm.
picture you're painting there. So again, going back to the 70% of agencies and law enforcement officers that exist across the country, that's just not a feasible thing, which makes
Mm-hmm.
makes it unique in terms of the approach that you're taking, but more specifically going back to the two primary focuses that you focus on within this. And again, I'll just say this. To me, with all the body cam footage that we see out
Mm-hmm.
there's a few things that come up. One is arrest and apprehension, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on once we go hands-on? Big problem, huge problem
Mm-hmm.
right now. And is it an over-reliance on tools? Is it a lack of confidence because we are over-reliant on tools, or that we haven't had the proper amount of training? Our fitness isn't where it needs to be. Obviously, we could dig deep into those rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
That thing pops up for me. But the other one, obviously, because we're seeing them now more than ever, is the officer-involved shootings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how many of those shootings are the SWAT guys, right,
Mm-hmm.
versus the officer on patrol that gets the call that he's been to or she's been to 100 times, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
turns into this situation. And then the decision-making process, the proficiency
Mm-hmm.
of that decision-making process, and actually taking action,
Mm-hmm.
that we have a lot of work to do. And this is not me bad-mouthing
Mm-hmm.
anybody, an agency, an officer, or whatever. It's
No.
just, these are obvious problems, and
Mm-hmm.
you can put your finger on them. And to your point, what can you actually impact? And then
Mm-hmm.
obviously the question comes down to, how do you actually do it? So you kind of outlined
Mm-hmm.
how it's set up there. But then the question always comes up, like, all right, well, who's paying for this? Right?
Right.
Who's actually paying for this? And you mentioned several times there's donors. And so this is a
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit that is reliant on fundraising in order
Mm-hmm.
to get this done. And when I talk to other folks that have maybe started their own training business, uh, funding is always the issue, right? We mentioned that. Like,
Hmm.
I've got to put butts in the seats. If I can't make this work. It's not a business anymore. It's a
Hmm.
charity, to which is
Right.
coming out of my pocket. So maybe we talk a little bit about that because I'm interested in understanding, like, what does that fundraising process look like? Who is
Hmm.
doing this? Who is, with all the defund the police and all the people that are trying to cut back things
Hmm.
for whatever reasons, the bureaucracy. I
Hmm.
wonder who's coming to the table on stuff like, you don't have to mention names, but who are the folks that are coming to the table to support this program?
So we've got several layers. Probably best to start at the beginning. So we are a nonprofit, a legit nonprofit, not an NGO, who
Oh,
does not.
that's an important distinction here, man, and that's why I
It
asked the
absolutely
question.
is.
Yep.
So we are an NGO because the difference between an NGO and a charity is that an NGO accepts government dollars in order to accomplish a task. That's what an NGO is. So we are not that. Our philosophical, um, it's not a church, but our philosophical guide star is Hillsdale College.
Okay.
So they are the citizens repository of the Constitution. Hillsdale College is. Dr. Arnn, and particularly in the law enforcement world, Dr. Regan, are the uh, guardians of the constitutional in Constitution. Besides the people, like they really understand it and they take it seriously, and uh, they they fight against the administrative state at every opportunity. So that's where the foundation's um, seeds
Gotcha.
come from Hillsdale. So um, the foundation does not accept any government money at all. So the reason for that, at any level. So the reason for that is it money always drives priority.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this
So
before. Yeah,
right.
absolutely. Uh,
Money drives priority. It is human nature. You can argue that it's bad that, you know, people who get drunk beat their wife. It's bad, but did you expect a different outcome?
right.
Like, it is human nature. It's bad. It shouldn't exist, but it does. Money always drives priority. So the goal of any good charity is to, number one, diffuse the contribution as widely as possible, because that prevents or it
Can
creates the biggest mitigation to the influence of that money because it's spread across a wide base.
I would say
Like, no
I'd say
one.
it mitigates the perversion of anything that
Yes,
and everything that can happen inside there. Yep.
correct. It also makes me more responsible to more people,
Hmm.
which is a good thing in a charity, right? It's not a grift. So my goal isn't to build myself a nice house and buy Porsches like a BLM organizer, right? The job here is to teach cops based on the missions that we talked about. So in order to do that most effectively and most dispersed, we have several buckets of money that we raise to. So one of them is the foundation's administrative and operational costs, right? The
Mhm.
foundation is about a year old. It's only been public for about a month, but because it took us about 11 months to get it organized in a way where it's actually a professional
Mhm.
charity. It's not
It's
a
legitimate. It's legitimate is
right.
the way what I would say.
And yes, and it takes time to build that correctly. It takes not only the relationship development, but the legal aspects and the administrative piece and things like that. So,
Costs money too.
yeah,
Let's be fair.
yes,
Costs money.
it
Yep.
costs a lot of money. So, we're about 400 grand into this thing.
Mm,
So that's what it costs to start a good charity. So part of that is payroll costs
mm.
because we don't want the small donors. We're going to talk about the small donor bucket here in a second. What I don't want is small donors who are we're asking for $20 a month, right? Less than you're probably paying to Patreon. So
Right.
um, we're asking for that. That is the true operational costs. We want all that money to go to the mission. So if 50% of that's getting siphoned off of your
Mhm.
donation, or even 10% is getting siphoned off, that's not a great thing. Like, we're not getting the mission done. So the first bucket is administrative and operational. It's also building the facility. That bucket already has, we're not where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And that's through the patronage of some industry folks from within the firearms and defense industry. Some people recognize the need for this,
Mhm.
and they are great Americans. Like, and it's not because they gave us money. They were great Americans before that. So, and there's several companies and defense manufacturers that are participating in that.
Good to know.
There are, one of them will be obvious next month when we start doing giveaways for the small donors. So
Great.
let's just put it that way.
Okay.
We have insurance companies that have donated us land. We have, and families. So those are the types of donors that are for that bucket. The next bucket is the scholarship endowments. So we need about 48 scholarships every year in order to max the first facility. Eventually, we'd like to build 2 facilities over the next 10 years. The one that we already have land for, we've already broken dirt on. That one is about 48 scholarships a year.
Okay.
So that covers um, one person for um, 20 course. I'm sorry about that. So there's 2 classes.
Mhm.
One of them is taught 20 times a year. The other
Gotcha.
one is taught 10 times a year.
Okay.
So that's 30 courses. Or I'm sorry, that's 30 course instances. What we're
Mhm.
trying to do is fill up scholarships so that there's up to 20 guys in each one of those classes that are funded by a individual scholarship.
Gotcha.
So that is the higher level fundraising. We're basically asking small businesses and high net worth people for 90 grand a year.
Gotcha.
They're businesses, especially, they're basically paying an employee, but they're getting 20 people into the class.
Mhm.
So it's paying for all the stuff that we'll talk about, what the foundation actually covers, and then the mission operations of the not only the primary mission, but the institute and the MTTs are funded by the small donors, by the $20 a month. So
Gotcha.
our goal is to get 15,000 folks to donate $20 a month. So I have seen charities, unfortunately, they're usually grifts, the ones who raise the fastest based
Mm.
on a sad internet video or something, right?
Right.
But we're looking for 15,000 folks to donate $20 a month. And that is to cover operational costs for the primary mission that aren't covered by the scholarships, but primarily to cover the institute and the mobile training teams. So
Gotcha.
that's the funding model. We're an open kimono. Like, there's nothing secret here. If people want to come see the facility, they can. If people donate $20 a month and they want to come watch part of a class or come meet cops who are getting trained, or more than welcome. Like, no problem. So once we get there, we'll be publishing our financial statements and all the things a legitimate train or charity does. So um, the reason for all of that is, number one, it needs to be enduring. So
Mhm.
if we do this for 5 years and then, we stop doing it, that's going to fizzle out. Like,
Yep.
we can train about 750 or 800 guys a year from across the country. So the goal is for them to be force multipliers, and train 10 or 12 other people in their own jurisdiction and encourage other people to come and become mentors and things like that. But that only has effect. It's like blood pressure medication, right? The
Yep.
first day you take it, your blood pressure doesn't go down. You're trying to build it up in your system. So that's how this mission actually gets accomplished, is over 20 or 25-year lifespans, not a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
So I wanted you to walk through that because I
mhm,
had asked you that question a couple months back
mhm,
when we had talked on the phone, and part of that's a test, right? And an
right,
eval of like, what are we actually doing here? Is this the good idea
right,
fairy? And we've got this cool plan on paper, or
right,
up on post-it notes on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
or how is this thing actually functioning from a business
Right.
perspective? Because while it is a
Right.
nonprofit, it is a
Right.
business, and I think the best intentions sometimes
Mm-hmm.
get really screwed up when people don't understand the business end of this and how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
So what I just heard you walk through was actually a little bit more detailed than what we had talked about before, and I know it's
Mm-hmm.
probably even continued to evolve here. But those targets seem very doable to me. When you talk
Mm-hmm.
about doing, I think you said 750
To
officers a
800
year.
guys a year.
Yeah, to 800 a year. When you think about the 70% of the
Mm-hmm.
agencies that have somewhere less than 15
Mm-hmm.
officers, right, to come through there and give them basically 2 weeks worth of training per
Mm-hmm.
per year, uh, that seems like a very doable thing with regard to understanding how that funding works. And if I'm
Mm-hmm.
donating, or if I'm giving money, or if I'm a recipient to this, like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
know, where is this going? Where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
Is this dirty money? Right. I think
Right.
is really where I'm coming from. And I think,
Right.
unfortunately, again, when you look at, again, you made the distinction between what a true charity nonprofit is versus an NGO. I think we've
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot of things. I think people have been kind of
Mm-hmm.
been made up to date probably in the last 4 or 5 months on what dirty money actually is and how that
Mm-hmm.
spending of your tax dollars, what actually happens with it as it comes down the line. So this is completely separate from all that, and
Mm-hmm.
that is unique, particularly in this circumstance. So
It
yeah,
it kind of is, and it was fortuitous that Elon and his guys came through and identified all those things that a lot of us on the inside of the government, or who deal with the government a lot, already knew all of
yeah, we're
that.
like, no shit,
But
like it's
but the public don't.
right, right,
You know, they
right.
don't know that, somebody's buddy who they met at a strip club is getting $300 million a year from USAID, right?
It's
And
gross.
they don't know it. It's disgusting. So we've always, since we started this process, we've worked to eliminate that as a problem. So the other piece that I didn't cover that I probably should have is what the department gets out of your donation, out of anybody's donation, right?
Yep.
So,
Chiefs are going to want to know this, right? They're going to need to be
mhm,
able to explain this to their city council and their mayor. So
right.
fire away.
So the tuition is free. So that, and it's not free, it's paid for by the donors. So
Gotcha.
a week long course at my day rate with 20 students uh, is about $1,500 a student for a week. So the donations are covering that. The donations are covering all of the ammunition and consumables. So all the ammo for the marksmanship stuff and the Sims ammo for the tactics and breaching training, all the breaching equipment, all the chem lights, all the stuff, all the consumables that anybody who's ever
Consumables.
been to a training class knows
Yep.
what they are, right? Um, it's not a ton of ammo per head, but over a year, over that many students, that's a lot of ammo.
That adds
So
up.
um, paying for some of the travel. The foundation funds $400 per student to the department for their travel. So we need to pull guys from all over the country. If it's just regionalized, it's not going to
Right.
uh, maximize effect nationally. So
Hmm.
we're not teaching anything specific to any state law. We're teaching the big five, which are kind of agnostic to state laws.
Or should
Uh,
be.
should be. Um, so we're paying for a good portion of their travel, if not all of it. Some guys will just drive here in a patrol car on a city card,
Hmm.
and the department just made $400. So
Hmm.
if it encourages them to come, awesome,
Good point.
right?
Good point.
So the last piece is the number one reason that cops don't leave their department to get trained. By that, I mean, even a 1 day class out of their jurisdiction on a scheduled workday creates overtime to cover their shift. So, in the law enforcement accounting or government bookkeeping, that's called backfill.
Hmm.
So, backfill is the cost of overtime while an officer is not at his scheduled shift.
Hmm.
So that is the number one reason that guys are not either sent to class or allowed to take leave for time that they've earned for that purpose.
Mhm.
Um, so that is the number one reason. The average cost nationally of 5 work days of backfill is about $1,200.
Hmm.
So that's what we're reimbursing every department with, is the
Wow.
backfill cost. So now this is an unusual piece. It's not hard to administrate, but it's unusual because some departments don't need that. They have budget, right? So the department, there's a pretty long application for a guy to come, and part of it their executive has to fill out. And one of those pieces is they can refuse the backfill money, and pass it on to the next guy who does need it.
That makes
Uh,
perfect
they have
sense.
they have that option. So because that's the second biggest expense to the course. And it's the number one reason that guys don't get sit outside for training
I hear it
is
all
the
the time.
cost of backfill.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. Even if,
So,
I mean, people are taking their days off to go do it. Will you help me with this course? No. You
mhm,
won't let me do it while, again, even during my shift. And again, like
mhm,
if this is offered on this isn't particularly this thing, but if this course is
mhm,
offered on a weekend and I have a weekend shift, I just simply, they're not going to give me the time off to be there because of what
mhm,
you just explained.
mhm.
Courses aren't typically offered on a Monday, Tuesday on my regular days off or whatever. So
Right.
that ends up being, and those are the officers. Those are generally speaking, those are the newer officers, right?
Mhm.
That are on shift, that are working
Yep.
the shit shift, right? Which is weekends or nights or whatever else, or
Mhm.
that Friday night bleeds into the Saturday
Mhm.
after, the Saturday morning, and at some point in there, you have to be with the family and eat and sleep and stuff because that's kind of
Right.
important, all that stuff. I
Right.
hear that too. Like
Right.
there's not there's not availability in my schedule, or the
Mhm.
department won't make availability for me in order to
Mhm.
do this. And you're absolutely right. I hear it all the time.
Mhm.
This is another part of the funny piece. It's not just a cost of a course. It's
Mhm.
what does it cost the agency on the back end? Um,
Because it actually costs the agency money for people to come, even if they're not paying the tuition. It
right,
costs the government that supports the agency money.
right.
It comes out of that executive's budget. So those are the things that the donors' money are going to support. Is those things. So.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted you to walk through that so people have a
Mhm.
clear understanding of how this is mapped out
Mhm.
and where their dollars are going at whatever tier, I'll just call it that
Mhm.
maybe, whatever tier they
Right.
come into in terms of support for
Right.
TF70, right? Um,
Right.
yeah,
And depending on the level of tier, they get, like, we want to give people benefits
some
for
benefits.
supporting us.
Mhm.
People who give $20 a month, every month we're giving away a gun, we're giving away optics, we're giving away other stuff. Uh, because of legal reasons, you can't call it it has to be a prize of some sort.
Yeah,
So
I
we'll
gotcha.
call it what we need to call it. But if they track our podcast once a month, we'll announce who it was. They can either accept it or they can give it to, they know a local cop at, you know,
Right,
Fried Chicken, Alabama. Like, and this
right.
guy's carrying a DPMS, you know, it's just a junker gun because it's what he can afford. And the department can't even afford to buy him a rifle, which is about 30% of small agencies. They don't own rifles, they allow guys to carry their own.
Mhm.
They can donate their prize from being a donor to that officer. So, and it's not bunk gear, it's the good stuff. So,
Right.
uh, and at the higher levels, folks who are endowment level or want to support in other ways. Obviously, we're trying to build a social media
Mhm.
presence, and it's always nice. We learned this at Alliance when I worked with Joe up at Alliance Police Department training. Having a banner with your donation uh,
Mhm.
highlighted in the back of most pictures is pretty valuable to a
Yeah,
corporation. So
yep.
those are the types of things we have the ability to do ethically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that being the important piece there, right?
Mhm.
The ethical piece and what makes
Right.
sense in terms of an ethical benefit or uh um opportunity. I maybe
Mhm.
is the way to look at this. Most businesses understand that value. Most of them do.
Right.
And if they know they're doing it for a good cause and
Mhm.
they're doing it for the people that buy their equipment, right?
Mhm.
And or support their communities or protect their communities, what
Yep.
all kinds of different things there. there is
Mhm.
money in that budget every year to be
Mhm.
making plans to invest
Mhm.
in different events, different
Right.
charities and organizations like that.
Mhm.
And I see that happening all the time. So,
Mhm.
again, just going back to the way it's structured and the way it's planned, it's very smart.
Mhm.
It's very organized. It's very
Mhm.
transparent, which
Mhm.
is, I think, more of the important piece here, so
Mhm.
that people know exactly where those things are going. I mean, you kind of
Yep.
just went through some of the costs and things like that. I have a lot of firearms instructor friends, right, where they work
Mhm.
inside agencies or outside, and
Right.
I hear from the consumer a lot, like, man, $700 for a 2-day class. That just seems so much. Like, you don't understand
That's a
how.
steal.
Yeah, you don't understand how this works, man. Like,
Mhm.
you don't understand the expense that goes into this, and
Mhm.
and all of those things. And I can try and respect that, but I need you to respect that there are things that you probably don't know, and you might want
Mhm.
to ask some questions and understand about that before you think a dude's making $1 billion a year.
Right. Ain't
Traveling the road
nobody.
in his pickup. Nope, I don't know anybody like that. I know
That
guys.
it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I know guys that were making a very good living working for some company somewhere, doing something outside of it. Once they
Mhm.
left law enforcement or they left the military or whatever, however they got into,
Mhm.
the shooting instruction game, that were very unsatisfied because they were working for people that they didn't like, they
Mhm.
didn't trust, there were no goals and values alignment, and they
Mhm.
were happy to go out and live the struggle, right?
Mhm.
To make what they needed to live in order to
Yep.
provide the service that other people that do value and do appreciate it and
Mhm.
are aligned, with that kind of thing.
Right.
So, man,
Yep.
I totally appreciate that. I appreciate this conversation. So, I think my bigger takeaways from this, I think,
Mhm.
sort of on a higher level, are one, the education that you provided sort of up front about, when we start to get into how the Constitution works, how taxes work, how funding works,
Mhm.
how agencies are structured across the United States, where the gaps are, the rationale for filling the gaps that you can fill, how you're going to
Mhm.
do that, or how you and how you've been doing that, and how
Mhm.
things are being brought to the table in order to get that done. I think, yeah, as this thing evolves, obviously, your primary, uh, your I guess your primary goal right now, if I had to guess, is like, we need to continue to collect funding, or we need to continue to
Mhm.
fundraise to fund this project while putting the right people in the right places, so that it
Mhm.
doesn't get to this point where we can't deliver what we're promising on. So here's the opportunity for the pitch, man.
Mhm.
Like, where do people go? How do they find out more? What do they do to
Mhm.
contact, to donate, learn more,
Mhm.
attend, get the mobile unit training team, the
Mhm.
mobile training team out to them? Give us
Mhm.
the 411 on all that, man.
So, by far, the simplest, best way to contact, well, let's start with contact first, because that's probably most important. So, our our website is a good place for general information. It's not down in the weeds, but it's the general info and the ability to donate. So,
Mhm,
that is TF70. That's like TF, like task force,
mhm.
70.org.
Okay.
ORG. If you just want to donate, like if you got something out of this and you think I can afford $20 a month, I'll send less to OnlyFans this month, right? So, which is unhealthy for you. But anyway, I'm not going to lecture you guys, but you know
Make
who
better
I'm talking to.
decisions. Make better
Make better
decisions.
decisions. It's tf70.org/donate.
Okay.
You can donate. Scroll down. It's kind of auto set for $20 a month, but you can change it to more a month, less a month,
Cool.
once, multiple, whatever. You can also submit a query, if you scroll down below that, for an actual prospectus if you're interested in supporting in a greater way. If you want to endow a scholarship, if you want to buy the shoot house, write, name writing, things like that. Those levels of donorship also come with time, the facility time, and instructors. If you've got employees or media events you need to do, things like that, that's part
Cool.
of the larger donations. Um, you can also check us out on all the socials.
Mhm.
Just search for Task Force 70 Foundation. Um, if you want to have an MTT, you need to email me. So
Mhm.
the subject should be MTT request, and
Mhm.
it's a complex email address, so the guys are going to have to pay attention. It's Chappy, Chappy at tf70.org.
Gotcha.
Chappy at tf70.org. And if you know a experienced cop, either he does or somebody else that he knows me. So it's not that hard to find my phone number if you start working the the relationship geography game with cops. Somebody will know me. So I've trained thousands and thousands of cops, and I've got thousands of cop friends. So if you're trying to get a hold of me, email is the quickest way. Or if you want to play Secret Squirrel Ninja and find my phone number, go ahead. Just text me first.
Gotcha. So I just want to kind of highlight something which I think is
Hmm.
also unique, and at least in my experience, particularly in given what I do with the podcast and the social
Hmm.
media stuff, and that
Hmm.
is oftentimes we see companies start with the marketing, and then they just
Hmm.
work the business out on the back end. Like, let's just see where this goes, and I start
Hmm.
making money, and then I get a following, and then that helps
Hmm.
me kind of expand my business, and I kind of figure that out as I go, and
Hmm.
prices change, and then I'm also figuring out, oh God, this cost me more money than I thought it was going to cost. I make a lot of
Hmm.
mistakes along the way. We all do
Right.
that. That's part of the process. But I find this a little bit different in that there's a well laid groundwork here,
Hmm.
and it comes from a very strong intention, and a
Hmm.
very strong understanding of the mission,
Hmm.
and the importance of that mission and the things that you're trying to do. And you've got
Hmm.
a you've got a very specific target audience and market. This is not a
Hmm.
shotgun effect kind of thing. You have a lot of things
Hmm.
going on, and it didn't start with, well, let's blast out this and see if we can get some money to
Right.
make this thing go.
Right.
It
Right.
has been quote unquote bootstrapped the other way in terms of going out and
Hmm.
working hard, fundraising, getting the right people on board, so that
Hmm.
when you're marketing this thing, it makes sense and people
Right.
understand what they're seeing
Hmm.
and what they're donating to. And I am super honored to be sort of part of that, just in getting your message
Hmm.
out on this platform, and hopefully it reaches, and I know it will, and I know it'll impact,
Hmm.
and people will have questions about this. And it's never my
Right.
intention to sell somebody's business, but in
Hmm.
this case, I would say, I'm very confident and anxious at the same time to see this thing grow for you guys, and for those people that need this
Hmm.
stuff.
Well,
Again, and from
that's
my
very appreciated.
yeah, man, from my perspective, and again, the
Hmm.
recommendation and who it came from is where it started. Again, going back to Chris Sislove and the things
Hmm.
that he does and has done and continues to do for the exact
Hmm.
same reasons, that
Hmm.
holds a lot of water for me. Um,
Hmm.
and I think I can only imagine that those are the same people that you're surrounding yourself with on a regular
Hmm.
basis. Again, I always do a little intel before I have this stuff, and
Hmm.
we talked. I've dropped your name a few times to a few
Hmm.
people, like, oh yeah, yeah, we've heard of John. I've only heard good things, right? Or I've
Hmm.
heard really good stuff. Like, your reputation precedes you, and
Hmm.
it didn't start with an Instagram account, and I appreciate that.
Right. Well,
So,
I appreciate that. So
yeah.
I've started a couple of businesses that have been fairly successful. I've also made my business flops. Everybody does. This was different because it's a charity. Um, I really feel like, say what you want about believing in providential action or whatever. I really feel like I unintentionally developed my stuff myself to do this mission. So when I came to that realization a couple years ago, I take people's trust very seriously. If this was a capitalist venture, and I was just trying to make a profit, I would have launched it years ago. Like you said, I would have just
Mhm.
made a new Instagram
Mhm.
account, started posting some cool guy videos.
Not hard to
I
do.
take I take the I know better than some, not as well as most people. I grew up in a very normal, great childhood. I've never really been in a down and out starting point. You know what I mean? But I do understand how hard dudes work for the money that they have,
Mhm.
and I'm very grateful. One of the benefits of the last election is especially young men are starting to realize just how they only have one life and how important every action they take is, right?
Precious, yep.
getting very intentional about what they do with their money is something I think is important, right? So part of one of many reasons for taking so long to get this set up and doing it absolutely correctly is I don't take it lightly to take even a $20 a month donation from someone. I they they gave time, which is the only thing we actually own, in order to earn that $20 a month. And I want to treat that with the reverence it deserves. So that's why it took so long to organize. That's why we're so open kimono about everything that we do. And it's why everything's so mission focused. So I appreciate you saying that stuff. But that's really why we exist. Like we're not trying to buy a Porsche. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a strong statement, and it's rooted in integrity. And
Yeah.
again, I think that's been sorely lacking, from a societal level and at a lot of
Hmm.
levels. And when you start to silo this into law enforcement training, firearms
Hmm.
training, the things that get brought to the table, and the opportunities that exist there,
Hmm.
that integrity gets violated often,
Hmm.
way too often for that matter. So it's good
Right.
to it's good to know and get to talk to a dude
Hmm.
who gets it and understands it and is surrounding
Well, I
himself with
appreciate
people
that.
that
I got
appreciate that. Mhm.
I appreciate that. I got one last thing to encourage folks who are watching, especially cops. I picked 5 core skills that I identified a problem or a challenge that needs to be addressed, right? I can only teach at maximum performance 5 years from now, 1,600 to 2,000 guys nationally. There are 204 other skills that the same thing exists for. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Every one of these are my big 5 that I identified are being problems. There's hundreds of other ones. So I would encourage people to try to do the same thing with the thing that they can touch. Like the retired DUI expert, like
Right.
figure out a way to teach 50 cops a year how to properly investigate a DUI. Because I can't tell you how much not only harm is caused when the public can drive unrestricted
Mm,
or in an unrestricted way drunk because the small local department cops don't know how to investigate a DUI, so they're afraid to pull people over.
mm.
Or they over enforce and they arrest people unnecessarily for DUI who aren't drunk. Like that happens. So it doesn't
One
happen a
exa-
lot,
yeah, that's one
but
example of things
yeah,
that are
that's
needed
one
out there.
example of
Right.
hundreds of things
Right.
that are needed, right? So,
Yeah.
anyway.
I love that. I think it's great advice, and it gives people something to be introspective about and
Mhm.
self-examine, like where can I give back. Most of the people that I talk to the show all went through that process for themselves, and that's kind
Mhm.
of oftentimes how they wind up here, just like you, to talk about that stuff. And that really is the underlying message of what the show is, and that is like, hey, if
Mhm.
there's a way to provide value,
Mhm.
and you can do that with integrity,
Mhm.
and without sacrificing that at all, like maybe
Mhm.
explore that some more. It's not going to be easy,
Right.
right? It's going to take work. In your case, it's years in the making. It's
Mhm.
$400,000 of, you know, of getting the thing off the ground, right, and getting it started.
Mhm.
But starting to see the fruits of your labor, I'm sure, is pretty rewarding. And
Right.
and
It
there's no
is.
paycheck. There's no paycheck bigger than that. I know that for a
Mhm.
fact from my own
Yep.
experience. So, look,
Yep.
John, thanks so much for your time, man. I appreciate you sitting down with me, and going through all of this. There's a lot for me
Mhm.
to marinate on, and I'll probably lay in bed staring at the ceiling tonight, kind of thinking about some of the things that you've gone through. Like I said, I'm anxious to see how this journey continues for you and your team, how it evolves, how it's impacting people. I'm sure there will be another opportunity for us to revisit this conversation, to catch up on
Oh,
some of the
yes.
things that you're learning. I would really love for that to happen, and I think we could focus on a few of the things that you're seeing and doing,
Mhm.
and more specifically, like the things that you learn about the successes people are having, taking it back
Mhm.
to people, which I know is the real goal here, is how do we
Mhm.
impact more people, right? And
Right.
ultimately leaving it better than you found it.
Right.
So, um,
I
look,
really
man,
appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, me too. If there's anything I can do to support you beyond this or whatever, don't ever hesitate to ask, my friend. And maybe one of these days I'll get out to Middle Tennessee and see that big brown for the ribbon cutting ceremony or something. You know, when that happens,
You,
keep me
your
posted.
name's already on the invitation list. So.
I appreciate that, man. I do. Thanks so much. All right, John.
Thank you,
Best of
brother.
luck. Yep. Yeah. You keep up the hard work, and hope to talk to you real soon.
You too, brother. Thank you.